I always knew my parents had a soft spot for my brother, Zach. But I never realized how deep it went until the day I learned they'd sold my inheritance behind my back. Growing up, the favoritism was subtle. At least it felt that way at the time. Zach was older by 3 years, loud and charismatic with a reckless streak that somehow always got excused. He'd skip school, get caught lying, wreck Dad's car, and still come home to warm dinners and boys will be boys lectures. Meanwhile, I brought home straight A's, helped clean the house without being asked, and got a quiet nod of approval, maybe. When I complained, Mom would say, "Olivia, he just needs more help than you do. You're strong. You'll be fine." So I learned to be the fine one. The dependable daughter. The self-sufficient girl who never made waves. And I was okay with that. Mostly. Until Grandma died. She passed away in her sleep just after my 26th birthday. Peaceful. Graceful. Just like she'd lived. I was devastated. Grandma had been more than family to me. She was the only adult in my life who saw me clearly. Who didn't compare me to Zach. Who actually listened. She lived in a beautiful old cottage on the edge of Asheville. 2 stories, wide front porch, cozy fireplace, a massive garden in the back. Every summer growing up, I'd spend weeks there. He taught me how to cook, how to paint, how to tend a garden. She even let me help her remodel the attic into a reading room when I was 14. That house wasn't just a building. It was part of me. And it was always understood, always said out loud even, that she was leaving it to me. Not out of favoritism but out of connection. Zach never cared about the place. He called it the middle of nowhere, and rolled his eyes every time we visited. But I loved it. I cherished it. And Grandma knew that. She even showed me her will once. "When I'm gone, I want you to make this your home," she told me, handing me a cup of tea on the porch swing. "This place belongs with someone who sees its soul. That's you, Liv." I never doubted it after that. So when she passed, I was grieving, but comforted by the thought that at least one thing would remain. Her home. My inheritance. My sanctuary. Until it didn't. Until one quiet afternoon a few months after her death, I dropped by my parents' house to return a set of keys, and overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. One that would change everything. And shatter the last piece of trust one had in them. I hadn't planned to stay long that day. I'd found an old spare key to Grandma's house in my apartment, a duplicate she'd given me years ago, and figured I'd return it to my parents, assuming they were still handling the estate paperwork. I let myself in with my own key the way I always had. The front door creaked like it always did, and I could hear the TV murmuring softly from the living room. I called out a quick, "Hey, it's me," but no one answered. So I slipped off my shoes and headed toward the kitchen. That's when I heard my mother's voice, low, serious, and far more careful than usual. "She doesn't know," she said. "And I don't want to be the one to tell her." My father sighed. "She's going to find out eventually. The house is already under Zach's name. It's public record. I just don't want to deal with her reaction. You know how Olivia gets when she feels blindsided." I froze mid-step, my fingers tightening around the key in my hand. Zach's name? The house. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. My body went cold with realization before I could even hear the rest. "She's always been the stable one," Mom continued, her voice firm now. "Zach needed a break. A clean start. We weren't just going to let that house sit empty while he spiraled again." "And what happens if she asks about it?" my dad said, quieter now. "Then we explain. That it made more sense. That we didn't think she'd care. She doesn't even like the countryside, remember?" A beat of silence passed between them. "She'll understand," Mom added. "She always does." I stepped backward, trying to make my exit before they saw me. My heart thundered in my chest. I was shaking. But my hand hit the side table in the hallway, knocking over a small decorative bowl that crashed to the ground and shattered into pieces. Both of them rushed out from the kitchen. My mother's face turned pale when she saw me. My father looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 5 seconds. "Olivia," my mom said gently, like she was approaching a wild animal. "We didn't know you were here." I didn't speak. I couldn't. "How much did you hear?" Dad asked, already knowing the answer. "All of it," I whispered. They exchanged a look. Then my mother stepped forward, her voice soft and placating. "Sweetheart, we were going to talk to you about this." "When?" I asked, my voice barely holding steady. "Before or after you signed the house away?" "It wasn't like that," she said quickly. We We were trying to do what was best for the family. For Zach. You mean for Zach? I snapped. Not for the family. Not for me. For him. Again. My dad exhaled. He's trying live. Really. He just needed a place to land. He's been through so much. We all have, I said sharply. Grandma left that house to me. She told me. She showed me the will. It wasn't finalized yet, my mom said, eyes flicking down. Mark, your uncle, was the executor. Zach convinced him it made more sense to put it in his name. He convinced him? I repeated. How? She didn't answer. I laughed, cold, hurt, furious. You let him lie. And you let him take my inheritance. Olivia, my dad said, voice hardening now. It's just a house. My jaw clenched. No, it was mine. And you knew that. I didn't wait to hear another excuse. I turned and walked out of the house, shaking, eyes burning. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the strong one. I felt robbed. Betrayed. Like I'd finally reached the breaking point I'd been told I was too stable to ever reach. I didn't sleep that night. I just laid there in bed, staring at the ceiling, the same question echoing in my mind. How could they do this to me? Over and over, my brain replayed their words. She's the strong one. She'll understand. Like that somehow justified everything. Like my silence, my obedience, my ability to stay composed had turned me into something they could use. Not a daughter. Not a person. Just the one who wouldn't complain. But I wasn't angry at Zach. Not at first. I was angry at them. My parents. The ones who were supposed to protect me. Who were supposed to honor Grandma's final wishes. The ones who watched her tell me year after year, this is your home someday, Liv, and then turned around and handed it to someone else. Still, I needed to understand the full picture. I needed proof. The next morning I called Uncle Mark, the executor of Grandma's estate. He sounded surprised to hear from me but quickly tried to act casual. Olivia. Wow, haven't heard your voice in a while. How's everything going? I have a question, I said bluntly. Why did you transfer Grandma's house to Zach? There was a pause on the line. Well, I thought that was what you wanted. My stomach turned. What do you mean? He came to me with a text from you, Mark said, his voice a little shaky now. Said you weren't interested in the house. That you'd prefer he take care of it. He showed me a screenshot. It seemed legitimate. I never said that, I replied flatly. What? I never sent that message. I never told anyone I didn't want the house. Grandma wanted me to have it. She told me. Multiple times. Silence. Then, oh my God. I could hear the horror in his voice now. Olivia, I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing what you wanted. I didn't question it. You didn't even call me? I said. You just took Zach's word for it and gave him my inheritance? I trusted him, he said weakly. I didn't think he'd lie about something like that. But he had. And they had let him. After the call, I stared at the phone in my hand, completely still. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was furious. Zach hadn't just taken the house. He had faked a message. Lied to our uncle. Manipulated the paperwork. And my parents had helped cover it up. The betrayal hit me like a wave. Heart. Cold. Full body. But once it passed, I felt something else underneath. Resolve. They thought I'd accept it. That I'd stay quiet like I always had. That I'd move on. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. I might have been the good girl. The quiet one. The dependable daughter. But that didn't mean I was weak. I had every right to that house. And I was done playing nice. It was time to take back what was mine. I found a lawyer the very next day. Her name was Tasha Klein, recommended by a colleague of mine who had gone through a brutal estate dispute with her own family. Tasha's reputation was sharp, aggressive when needed, thorough always, and particularly experienced in inheritance fraud and contested wills. She didn't just know the law, she knew how people twisted it. I met her in a quiet office with tall windows and matte black bookshelves lined with legal volumes and framed degrees. She offered me water, then asked me to start from the beginning. I told her everything. Slowly, carefully, but with building fire in my voice. About Grandma. The will. The years of promises. The conversations on the porch. The soft betrayal of hearing my parents give it away. The lies Zach told. The forged message. Uncle Mark's stunned phone call. Every single detail. Tasha listened without interrupting, her pen moving across a yellow legal pad in sharp, short strokes. When I finished, she looked up, eyebrows slightly raised. "Let me get this straight," she said. "You were named in the will. Your parents knew. Your uncle transferred the deed based on a text message Zach produced, which he never verified with you." I nodded, heart pounding. She flipped through the printed will I'd brought. "This is clean. She made it very clear that the property goes solely to you. No trust. No co-beneficiary. Just your name." "Then how did it get transferred?" Tasha gave a thin smile, not one of amusement but of recognition. "Family manipulation meets legal laziness. It happens more often than you'd think. Your uncle didn't follow protocol. He should have confirmed with you directly before signing off on anything. He left the door wide open. And your brother walked right through it." My throat tightened. "Can we get it back?" "Oh, we're not just going to get it back," she said, leaning forward. "We're going to make it clear that this was fraud. Fabricated consent. Misrepresentation. You didn't relinquish your inheritance, your brother took it. Illegally." Tasha filed the initial petition that same afternoon. It felt surreal, like something from a legal drama, not real life. But when she handed me the copy of the court filing with my name at the top as the petitioner, and Zach's name in bold as the respondent, I felt something stir in my chest that I hadn't felt in weeks. Power. I was no longer the girl standing in my parents' kitchen, stunned and speechless. I was now someone with a case. With representation. With a voice. My parents found out 2 days later. I got a string of text from my mother first. "Olivia. What is this letter from the court? You're suing your own brother. Why are you dragging this through the system? We can talk. This doesn't have to get ugly." Then my dad. "We thought you understood. You always put family first." I didn't respond to either of them. Because for once I was putting myself first. Zach tried calling me 3 times. I didn't pick up. On the 4th try he left a voicemail. His voice was low, tired, and defensive. "Liv, come on. You're really going to do this? Over a house. You don't even live there. You're just trying to punish me." I deleted it without finishing. It wasn't about punishment. It was about justice. They thought I'd roll over like I always had. They thought my silence was weakness. But they didn't realize the storm that silence was holding back. And now it was rolling in. The courthouse was smaller than I expected. A pale gray building tucked behind a row of older brick offices, with ivy climbing the side walls and a rusted bench out front. It looked more like a post office than the place where I'd fight for my grandmother's legacy. But I didn't care. I wasn't there for appearances, I was there for truth. Tasha met me out front, dressed in a tailored navy suit and carrying a leather folder under one arm. She looked like she'd stepped out of a legal thriller. Confident. "Ready." She gave me a nod of quiet reassurance and said, "You ready to get your house back?" I nodded, but my stomach churned. Inside, Zach was already there, sitting alone at one of the courtroom benches. He wore a dark gray blazer and a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked nervous, though he tried to mask it, tapping his fingers against his leg, glancing at the door every few seconds like he expected someone to come save him. Our parents weren't there. I wasn't surprised. When he saw me, he gave a slight shake of his head like, "You're really going through with this?" I didn't blink. I sat beside Tasha, who immediately began organizing the documents we'd prepared. Copies of the will. A statement from Uncle Mark. Metadata from the fake text message Zach had presented. A timeline of events. Photos of me and Grandma at the house over the years. Even emails Grandma had written to me referencing our house. The judge entered. A woman in her late 60s with sharp eyes and a firm posture. She wasted no time with pleasantries. We were sworn in and then the hearing began. Zach spoke first. He kept it casual. Charming. Full of vague gestures and phrases like miscommunication and family misunderstanding. He claimed he never meant to deceive anyone. That the house was sitting unused. That he believed I wasn't interested and had simply taken initiative. He even added a touch of pity to his voice. "My sister's always been strong-willed," he said with a light chuckle. "I just didn't think she'd take it this far." I stared at him like I didn't know who he was anymore. When it was our turn, Tasha stood. Everything about her tone changed the energy in the room. She was calm but sharp. Kind but utterly unyielding. "Your Honor, this is not a story about miscommunication. This is a case of fraudulent transfer of property. Property that was explicitly left to my client Olivia Reed, as stated in the will dated July 2, 2 years ago. The respondent, Zachary Reed, manipulated the executor into transferring the deed using a falsified message. One we have metadata for, proving it was fabricated. She handed over the exhibits like they were evidence in a criminal trial. We also have written correspondence from the deceased confirming her intention for the property to go solely to Olivia. This was not a vague wish. It was her dying will. Zach shifted in his seat. The judge skimmed the papers in silence, her eyes scanning the documents quickly, occasionally raising an eyebrow. Tasha continued. Zachary Reed had no legal claim to the property. He gained access through deception. This was not an error. This was a theft disguised as family loyalty. For a long moment the courtroom was completely silent. Then the judge looked up and asked Zach one question. Did you get written or verbal confirmation from your sister about her disinterest in the property? Zach hesitated. I had a message. But I didn't save it. The judge raised a single eyebrow. Then how did you show it to the executor? He stammered. I think I deleted it. I didn't think. She held up a hand. That's enough. 10 minutes later her verdict was read aloud. This court finds that the property transfer was executed under false pretenses and without the informed consent of the rightful beneficiary. Deed and ownership of the property at 122 Meadow Hill Lane shall be returned to Olivia Reed immediately. The court recognizes her as the sole legal owner. I felt like I'd forgotten how to breathe. It was over. Zach sat slumped in his chair, defeated. The smirk was gone. His hands were clenched, his face flushed. I didn't look at him again. As I stepped outside into the fresh air, it hit me all at once. I'd done it. I'd fought for what was mine. Not out of revenge but out of respect. For myself. For Grandma. And for every time I'd been told to stay quiet and be the strong one. This time being strong meant not staying quiet. The first time I pulled into the driveway of the house. My house. After the court decision I sat in the car for almost 10 minutes without moving. It was exactly as I remembered it, and yet everything felt different. The cracked stone path leading up to the porch. The white fence that needed repainting. The crooked mailbox with Grandma's old handwriting still barely visible on the faded label. Only now it wasn't just nostalgia. It was reality. The property that had once been ripped from me was finally mine again. Wiggly. Unquestionably. I stepped out of the car slowly, keys in hand, gravel crunching under my feet. There was no welcome committee. No red ribbon. Just the wind through the trees and the soft creak of the porch swings swaying in the breeze. The front door was unlocked. Zach was gone just like the court had ordered. He'd cleared out the same day the judgment was finalized. But he hadn't bothered to clean. The house was in rough shape. Empty beer bottles lined the windowsill in the living room. Takeout boxes were piled in the sink. The scent of stale air and something vaguely sour clung to every surface. In the hallway, a framed photo of Grandma and me, one I had taken as a child, was face down on the floor, the glass cracked. I picked it up gently, brushing off the dust. My chest ached. It wasn't just about reclaiming the property. It was about restoring the respect that had been lost in the process. I didn't cry. Instead, I took a deep breath, tied up my hair and rolled up my sleeves. The first day I aired out every window. Hauled garbage bags to the curb. Scrubbed the kitchen until my arms burned. I stayed overnight on an inflatable mattress, surrounded by trash bags and a single lamp plugged into the wall. I ordered pizza, lit a candle Grandma had made years ago, and sat on the floor cross-legged, eating in silence. And for the first time in months I felt at peace. Over the next few weeks the house started to come back to life. I repainted the living room the pale sunflower yellow Grandma had loved. Refinished the hardwood floors upstairs. Cleaned out the attic and rediscovered a box of her handwritten letters, pressed flowers and recipes. I brought back her rocking chair, her teacups, her floral quilts. Everything Zach had shoved into storage or tried to get rid of. I rebuilt the garden out back, ripping up weeds and laying down new soil, planting rosemary, thyme and lavender the way she had every spring. Every room I cleaned, every corner I restored felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. This wasn't just a house. It was my history. It was my healing. People talk about closure like it's a clean break. A final moment. But for me it was slow. Quiet. found in the sound of a paintbrush sweeping over old walls. The first bloom of purple in the garden. The creak of the front steps as I came home at sunset, alone, but not lonely. Zach never reached out again. Neither did my parents. I think they were ashamed. Or maybe they still believed I'd overreacted. Maybe they expected me to forgive and forget like I always used to. But not this time. This time I had drawn a line and held it. And now every time I stepped through the front door I knew exactly who I was. Not the quiet daughter. Not the afterthought. Not the backup plan. I was the rightful owner. I had taken back what was mine. Brick by brick, moment by moment. And no one would ever take it from me again. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when my mother finally broke the silence. I had just finished watering the garden and was sitting on the porch swing with a glass of iced tea, the late spring sun filtering through the trees. My phone buzzed on the armrest beside me. Mom. The first time she'd reached out in nearly 3 months. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi," I said flatly. There was a pause, like she hadn't expected me to pick up. "Olivia," she said softly. I wasn't sure if you'd answer." I almost didn't. Another pause. "I wanted to check on you," she continued. "On the house. We haven't spoken since everything." "You mean since you gave away what wasn't yours?" The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. I'd spent too long softening everything for everyone else's comfort. She sighed. "I know. And I'm not calling to argue. I wanted you to know that we didn't mean for it to go that far." "Then why didn't either of you say something? Apologize. You let me find out on my own. You defended him when you knew what he'd done." There was a beat of silence. Then finally, "We trusted Zach," she admitted. "We've been trusting him for a long time. Too long probably. And we didn't realize what that had cost you until it was too late." I closed my eyes, holding the phone tightly. Her voice sounded tired. Older. Like the weight of what they'd done had finally started to settle in. "I think," she continued, "we got used to believing you didn't need anything from us. You were always so independent. So capable. And we thought Zach, he needed more." "I didn't need more," I said. "I just needed fairness. Respect." "I know," she whispered. I could hear the lump in her throat. "Your father," she hesitated. "He doesn't know what to say. He's embarrassed. But still too proud to pick up the phone." I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. "He let me down," I said. "You both did. And I don't know how to forgive that yet." "You don't have to," she said quickly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just needed you to know we understand now. We were wrong." I didn't respond right away. I stared out at the garden. Lavender in full bloom, rosemary thriving near the fence. Grandma would have loved it. She would have said I made the place mine again. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "Can we maybe come visit sometime?" she asked. "Not now. Just when you're ready." I thought about it. Not because I was eager to see them, but because for the first time in a long time she didn't sound like a mother trying to fix things or justify them. She sounded like someone who had finally realized the cost of silence. "Maybe," I said. "One day." We hung up without much else. And I sat there on the porch swing for a long time, the breeze brushing over my shoulders, the warmth of the sun catching on my cheekbones. I hadn't forgiven them, but I had made peace with where I stood, and that for now was enough. It's been a year now. 12 full months since I stood in that courtroom and took back what was rightfully mine. Since I faced the people who were supposed to protect me and realized I didn't need their permission to stand up for myself. Since I stopped being the quiet, agreeable daughter and started being me. The house is completely restored. The porch swing is freshly painted. The garden blooms in layers of color every spring. Lavender, marigolds, rosemary, peonies. Inside, the walls are warm and alive with light. I kept some of Grandma's old wallpaper in the hallway just for her. The reading room upstairs has become my favorite place in the world. Every afternoon I sit there with a cup of tea and a book just like we used to. I framed the original will, the one that named me as the heir, and hung it in the study not out of bitterness but as a reminder. A reminder that I didn't just inherit a house. I inherited worth. Value. Belonging. People often think that reclaiming something is just about property or money. But this was about identity. About undoing a pattern of being overlooked, underestimated, and expected to stay silent. Zach moved to another state. He hasn't contacted me since the hearing. Sometimes I wonder if he still believes he deserved it. That he was somehow owed more than me because he asked louder, fell harder, needed more. But that's not my problem anymore. My parents visited once. It was awkward at first. They stood at the edge of the porch like strangers, unsure if they'd be allowed in. I let them. They walked through the house slowly, taking in the changes. My mother cried when she saw the kitchen. Grandma's teacups lined neatly on the shelf. My father said little, but before they left, he squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "You did good, kid." It wasn't everything. But it was something. And I've learned to accept something without needing to twist it into more. Because the truth is, I'm not the same person I was when this started. Back then I would have let it go. I would have swallowed the pain, told myself it wasn't worth the fight, convinced myself that keeping the family together was more important than standing up for myself. But now I know that real peace doesn't come from pretending things are okay. It comes from fixing what's broken. From drawing lines and holding them. From planting yourself firmly in the truth and letting it grow. This house, the one they tried to take from me, is more than a building. It's a symbol of every time I refuse to be erased. I sit on the porch most evenings now, a cup of tea in my hands, the air filled with the scent of lilacs and something cooking in the oven. Sometimes I talk to Grandma out loud. Not because I expect an answer, but because I know she would have been proud. Proud that I didn't give up. Proud that I knew my worth. And proud that, in the end, I didn't just reclaim her house. I reclaimed myself.